considered opinion, and I repeat, this is my opinion coming from room 592, that even the COVID task force has been a bunch of politicians that has been applied to manage over a national health crisis. We need these elections done and over with so that the matters of this country can be looked after with the kind of attention that they require. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to remind you all that as we speak, there is a situation with the education system. Children are being told that they should go to school, or at least that's the word coming out. The classes are to resume so that children can be prepared for their oncoming exams. As of today, the Guyana Teachers Union has asked and called on teachers to stay home. So that is another brewing matter that we will have to discuss, but not tonight. Tonight, we want to focus on these elections. And we have asked Mr. Ramesh Persaud, who is an analyst, who has been an observer in these elections, to kindly join us tonight to talk us through the numbers and what they mean. And we have also asked Mr. Ram to kindly spend this time with us to walk us through the legal issues, make us understand in a better way what the next couple of days could mean for Guyana now that this recount is over. Ladies and gentlemen, you would all recognize that the narratives being spewed by the various political persons have not stopped. In fact, from day to day, the narrative is changing. So I wish to remind you, a couple of weeks ago, it was let every vote count. Every vote, every region, every ballot must count. Now, the narrative is that it doesn't matter that it's counted. What matters is whether they were valid or not. There is a serious charge being made that a majority of the votes counted were fraudulent without a proof to point to their fraud. Mind you, one must keep in front of us that there are allegations of fraud, but no proof of such fraud. All of those are, things that we think of on a day-to-day basis. I'd like to then say welcome to Leonard Gildari, my co-host, and hand over immediately to Mr. Ramesh Persaud to walk us through these numbers. Mr. Persaud, we are seeing that the PPPC has 15,000 votes in excess of the next closest party, which is the APNU AFC. Can you tell us these numbers, what they mean? Is there a winner in these elections, unofficial winner of these elections? And what do these numbers translate to with regards to where we are in Guyana? Over to you, Mr. Persaud.
All right, thank you very much, Yoga. Good night to Leonard and Mr. Ram, and to all the listeners tonight. So the recount exercise has been completed, but before I get into the numbers, I would just like to restate a few things here. So we've accounted for every single ballot box. All 2,339 ballot boxes were accounted for. The votes in every ballot box were counted, and the votes were also tabulated. Now, as every ballot box was counted, the valid votes in every ballot box has been put on a statement of recount. That statement of recount clearly claims that the GCOM has certified that valid votes were in the box, and then the party agent further signed certifying that valid votes were in the box. Now, all of those statement of recounts have now been tabulated, and the numbers are available. The certification for Region 4, tabulation will be made tomorrow, or made available tomorrow. As it is right now, it is showing that the PPP is the projected winner. I think we can't legally declare any winner because that's the domain of GCOM. And the PPP is leading the APNU AFC by in excess of 15,000 votes. But what is important to point out is that the PPP has won the election, or has won the majority by only 6,320 votes. So a straight competition between the PPP and APNU AFC is a 15,000 differential. When you factor in the impact of the small parties who may have also gained the seat, the win margin of the PPP is 6,320, which gives them about 50.7% of the votes. So that's where we are at this time. Good. All nine regions have been certified, and the certificates of tabulation issued. That certification of tabulation reads, it's a certificate of tabulation of valid votes. All right, let's be clear about that. The only other certificate that is to be certified now tomorrow by the tabulation supervisor and the district coordinator is Region 4. Good. But we all know the numbers. Now, the thing about the recount is that we went into the recount looking for 476,000 valid votes. Only 460,000 valid votes were found. What do I mean by that? When we take the declarations that are on GCOM's website and you add them up, we are supposed to get 476,000 valid votes, but the recount has produced only 460,000 valid votes. I was there for almost half of those.
Okay, Ramesh, pause a minute.
Those valid votes.
Ramesh, stop a minute. Leonard, that is a mic drop moment. Forget everything else.
What he's saying is that GCOM has added 15,000 more persons onto the list.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask Mr. Persaud to please go through that last bit again, because this is important in our discussion as well, everyone. Look, GCOM website, the declarations that they posted has a certain amount of votes, and there's been lots of talk about migrants and dead people and all of these things. However, here is what GCOM has, and here is what the total number of valid votes would be. Sorry, Ramesh, back over to you.
Yes, the declarations made by GCOM with the 10 district returning officers, as is published on their website, sums to a total of 476,000 valid votes, with the APNU AFC in those declarations gaining 237,000 valid votes, and the PPP getting 229,609 valid votes, and the smaller parties getting just about 9,000 valid votes. So we went into the recount looking for 476,000 valid votes, 4,000 rejected ballots, which will give you 480,000, but the recount produced only 460,352 valid votes. A difference, I believe, of just about 15,692 votes. So the recount, the ballots found in the ballot boxes only added up. Valid ballots, 460. Now, you know what's amazing about that? Those 460,000 ballots that were found, the rejected ballots and so, I would say in almost all cases, the GCOM staff were able to reconcile. Now, before the box is recounted, the GCOM staff has a spreadsheet with each box and how many ballots were issued to those boxes. Good? And in almost every instance, it is reconciled. We know of the boxes that are being in dispute because of missing document. So the reconciliations were incomplete for those. But we can explain that scenario a bit later down.
I would like you to tell me where the 15,000 ballots went.
15,600 less valid votes. Forms our suspicion that the declarations were overstated for Region 4.
Okay, and this would be the March 4th and the March 13th declarations.
Yeah, both of them were consistent. So it's made by
just to let you know, Ramesh, that when we refer to the March 4th to the March 13th scenarios, we use the phrase that we borrowed from Mr. Says Gunrad from spreadsheet to bedsheet. So spreadsheet to bedsheet. It led to a 50,000. Sorry, back to you, sir.
Yeah, so those are the numbers as it is right now. So
tell us a little bit about the rejected votes as of March 13 and the total rejected votes now.
Well, the rejected votes that I have based on the March 13th declaration is showing here 4,017 votes after the recount, and this is just dealing with the general component, right? It's 4,211 rejected votes. So the rejected votes are increasing.
Consistent.
And it is consistent. I figured the March 13 one got a little error in it, but it's pretty consistent, you know. And out of those rejected votes, I was there and I observed 60 boxes being counted approximately. Um, I would say 50% of those rejected votes are on unmarked ballots, meaning that they were marked for no party. Okay, about 45% of it, maybe 40% of it, were people marking for multiple parties on those ballots. Good?
Okay.
That's for the set that I analyzed.
And Ramesh, just quickly, sorry, coming back to these rejected votes, because a lot of noise has been made that the disciplinary services votes have all been rejected, and all of these things. The disciplinary service total is about 8,700 something. So if the total number of rejected votes is 4,211, how does this 4,211 stack up to previous elections?
Well, in previous election, I think I have that number somewhere there. The last time around, the spoiled votes were just about 4,000 too.
Okay.
If you bear with me 1 minute, I think I can put it up.
So in the meanwhile, it's pretty consistent election to election too. So there's great.
I mean, spoiled votes, I think in the past was as high as 8,000 at some point. Up to 2006 and so forth, all right? And then it started coming down. So the rejected ballots is pretty consistent. It's under 1%. You know, it's pretty consistent, all right? The point there, though, is that during the recount, we couldn't tell what was a disciplinary service ballot or what was a regular ballot. All ballots cast in the box was intermixed, of course, and nobody could differentiate which was regular and which was military. But it made that 8,000 ballots was not counted. The final numbers here are proving that. Even the previous numbers are proving that rejected ballots did not exceed 4,000 or just about 4,000. Now, the final point I want to make there, as I was continuing from the previous one, the ballots that were unstamped, those were in the minority, right? Other than the two locations, Sophia and Pindola, that would have carried that number up close to 200. With almost all the other boxes, those unstamped ballots was just about 200 and something, right? Which in most cases you don't have them per location. And you can see it's an error that was made by the person who stamped them, right? It's, you have double of the stamps at the top, but none for the regional at the bottom.
A quick question there. Do we have a comparison to 2015 figures to see? You said 460,000. What's the number for 2015?
I don't have that readily available. But the valid votes for 2015, I'm having a table here. I can't confirm 100% that it is correct, but it says 411,000 valid. So
411? So where did this...
By almost 50,000 votes increase.
How does that... are you able to come to a conclusion as to what could have triggered that increase? Is it because of how critical these elections were?
At this stage, I'm unable to draw any conclusion on that. I guess it's the
Leonard,
intensity of the campaigns and so forth.
Yeah, Leonard, what I'm hoping we do is towards more later down towards the week, we can have Ramesh and some other analysts and so forth join us to look at the percentages, the turnout rate, those kinds of percentages that would make these numbers mean something to us. Because we have to also address the allegation from APNO AFC that 40-something thousand votes, this unknown growth of the population. We will have to address that. Ramesh, thank you for that synopsis, and we'll come back to the numbers. Problem. Mr. Ram, welcome once again, sir. Sorry to keep you waiting. I want to throw this at you, reading from Mr. Joe Harmon, who has posted on his social media the words, "Tabulation is not validation." Over to you, Mr. Ram.
And Harmon's statement is desperation. That would be my response immediately. Before I give a response to the broader issues, I want once again to acknowledge all the young people. I've heard of 17-year-olds and so on as observers at the recount. It's a tremendous achievement. I think we've created a generation of very committed individuals, and they all deserve recognition. I must say as well that from all the reports, the GCOM people did an excellent job, particularly at the operational level. Now, there were some standouts. Um, the, the woman, Mrs. Joseph, and the Deputy Chief Election Officer, and so on. What Ramesh has just referred to, and the count sheet, what it has established is that there has been real fraud perpetrated by Mingo and certainly others. Mingo did not do this alone. I think Mingo is being made the scapegoat and the sacrificial lamb. There are others who knew of this, what Mingo had done. They kept quiet. Ramesh, by the way, I don't mind being interrupted. It's not only the 15,000 inflation for the APNU AFC, is that there were 3,639 votes that were taken away by Mingo in his tabulation. And I think that's important because obviously they felt, well, you know, we can't, if we cook the books, an expression Ramesh and I would know a lot about, you could have gone beyond the 100%. So what you do, you take away from the PPP. And that in fact is what happened. The other comment I want to make, and which is on the first point, do you realize we did this without the presence of the Carter Center? And again, that is a remarkable achievement. We must also note that there was a lot of cynicism as to whether this recount would in fact go to conclusion. That it has, I think, has to do with the diplomacy, the commitment of everybody, including the APNU AFC. So whilst they were there spewing all kinds of really illiterate and innumerate garbage, and I'm sorry, people like James Bond and them, Christopher Jones, they were insulting their own people, their own supporters. So I think we've come a significant way, is the first step. Now, if you look at it, Suriname had their elections, I think was on May 25th. Their election body has concluded, despite the fact that you had Bouterse fighting for his life and his freedom. St. Kitts has had elections within I think it's late last week, and that's done. Guyana has become the laughing stock of the world. To get back to your thing, Harman saying tabulation is not validation. Well, I don't know what he thought was taking place in that room, and I suspect that Harman and company continue to rely on any floating bubble that they see, think this mirage, thinking that this is going to save them. They thought, for example, that by ducking those documents at the Ashman building on, I think, the evening of March the 2nd, and that's on video. We know where the documents are. We know that the upper level of GCOM was involved in another type of fraud. And to hear Harman and James Bond, and well, you know, sometimes I don't even want to mention Master Williams. To hear them talk about fraud is the greatest irony that possibly has come out of these elections. We have proven fraud. You have the Commissioner of Police who has provided GCOM with incorrect if not and misleading information, whether deliberately or not. And here you have a fraud that has now been established. And when you think about it, think what this recount has cost this country. It runs into tens of millions of dollars and probably $100 million and even more. We don't know. Maybe we will get some number at some stage. So to say that tabulation is not validation, really doesn't mean anything. It's good soundbite. It is part of the process, an unnecessary process. There is no reason, if you were having a recount, while we should go through this rigmarole of having Lowenfield reporting to the commissioners going back to Lowenfield going back to the commissioners. That's the circus. It's more than a circus, it's a circus. And so we are probably still another 15 days maybe to the declaration of the results of the elections, leading to the swearing in of the president, whoever that person is going to be. The numbers clearly suggest is the PPPC presidential candidate, Irfan Ali. I would not be surprised if we're going to have further court intervention, but we can probably discuss this later in the program so that it doesn't seem to be a monologue. As to why I think there may be or there may not be court action in this matter, because clearly we are following the pattern of the no confidence motion, where the matter went all the way to the CCJ, and Granger actually served out his term, even though he is on record as the first president in independent Guyana, or in the history of Guyana, to have been removed by a vote of no confidence in his own parliament. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Chris. Leonard, the issue that we discussed today, when Chris and Ramesh wasn't here, would have been that, and Chris mentioned it, would have been from November 2018, the night following the no confidence motion. Mr. Nagamutu, Mr. Granger, et al., they were openly on media saying that they have no choice. They had to follow what is the outcome of having lost the confidence motion. Then the goalpost got shifted. We come to September the following year, September 2019, when the CCJ said you are a caretaker government and you need to have elections within the constitutional time frame. That is after almost a year has passed already, by the way. The goalpost then shifted and shifted and shifted. Then Mr. Granger declared elections in for 2020, March 2nd. In that process, we saw so many goalposts shift. Then March 3rd hit us. Goalpost shifted again. March 13th hit us. It shifted again. We've gone to a recount. The recount started with a drum beats, every vote must count. Then it got shifted again. So, gentlemen, we have had the continuous pushing of the goals all the time. And I need Ramesh, you first, and then Mr. Ram. We have this question that is bothering almost everybody in this nation. Will these elections come to an end with the eventual swearing in of a president that is in line with the mandate of the electorate? On March 2nd, the electorate voted for a replacement of the current government. And as yet, that has been thwarted by every bit of deceit you could think of. Ramesh, will these processes come to an end soon in your analytical mind? And what? Let's come to that now.
I would like to think so. I believe after the declarations on March 13th, when those were made, and then all of the cries and the denouncement of those from everybody internationally, if the president wanted to probably swear in, then he probably could have, because he had declarations in his favor. So recognizing that, I think that I'm inclined to think that the president wants to do the right thing. I'm inclined to think that the GCOM is going to produce declarations that are going to reflect the will of the people. I mean, one of the amazing things about this recount process, if I can just step back a little bit, is that the process was so transparent and so fair to all the parties that all the concerns of every party was listed, all right? One party was making the majority of objections and observation, but GCOM was fair enough to listen to all of them, document them, and to have them in those observation report. I believe that the June 13th timeline is still ahead of us. The June 16th timeline is still ahead. And I would like to strongly believe that GCOM will review those documentation. And I'm confident that the chairperson will make the right decision. Don't ask me why I'm that confident. I'm just getting the gut feeling based on reviewing decisions of the past that, you know, what's most amazing is that throughout this recount, I mean, we are at this recount because of what was declared on March 13th and the whole issue of not being, having the correct information. There are parties within GCOM who knew that tampering of SOPs to give you incorrect numbers in the tabulation existed. Those same parties were in existence and had to sign off on statement of recounts and so forth. And they allowed all the statement of recount as accurately produced by the recount process through the various workstation to reach to the tabulation center. That for me inspires confidence that, you know what, the senior staffers and the people at GCOM wants to do the right thing. They've allowed the right thing to come out of their workstations and to be tabulated. And I would like to think that those people will allow the right tabulation to end up being accumulated in the report for a decision to be made by the commission as a whole. So I'm going to treat it as being an optimist.
So Ramesh, if you are optimistic that Mr. David Granger, President David Granger, wants to do the right thing, why hasn't he done the right thing? Instead, Mr. Granger has made more appearances to the nation over these past 2 weeks, than he did for his entire term in office. Why, and Mr. Ram, I want to come to you with this one. Why Mr. Granger would now, at this point in time, suddenly insert a need for a CARICOM observer mission report to be a part of this process? We had an entire court hearing to decide that CARICOM is not part of this final process. They're merely observers. Why does Mr. Granger put it as part of his four-pronged thing, in my view, shifting the goalpost again? Mr. Ram.
Well, Mr. Granger has not shown himself to be the essence of trustworthiness in the past 5 years. From day one, he breached the Commingsburg Accord with his coalition partners. He has breached his oath of office. He has, I think you said earlier, the motion of no confidence. He messed around with it, and he appointed someone illegally, and we mustn't forget that is when a lot of this thing started, when he put Patterson, the head GCOM, the man whose competence and everything, I mean, and obviously the legality. So one can never trust Mr. Granger, and that's a tragedy when you look at your country's president and you would say publicly, I do not trust him, and I really do not trust him. I don't know where he got that story about inserting the CARICOM team into that presentation he made. In fact, if you look at the order, the CARICOM team has to make an order and a report on recommendations, which is the typical things any observer group does. This, of course, is part of this aid memoir, but I don't know if Granger feels that the CARICOM team would give him what the courts didn't give him, and certainly what the electorate did not give him. The electorate rejected Mr. Granger, and certainly when you look at the votes of the PPP and the other small parties whose performance qualitatively as opposed to quantitatively in the number of votes, one cannot help but admire. So whether Granger is hoping that somehow this CARICOM mission is going to somehow, and I'm not sure in what he hopes to get. The numbers are clearly against him. It's almost inane for his persons to refuse to sign that they were present. I mean, it's such an absurdity. Whether they're going to sign these matrices that are going to be submitted to the chief elections officer on or before June 30th is another matter. They may very well refuse. Well, let them refuse. It doesn't matter. I don't think it will matter a lot. Granger, like Harman, is holding on to a thread. They clearly do not wish, and I speak to some supporters of the government, and the expression "they're not going anywhere" is consistent. So I'm not optimistic that that the government, the Granger administration, will not force themselves onto the nation as they did following the motion of no confidence, after which by March 22nd, we ought to have had elections, and we didn't by virtue of the decision by the CCJ. By September 18th, we should have had elections. We did not. So it's very difficult. And as far as I think your question, will these elections come to a constitutional end? I'm paraphrasing there.
Yes, yes.
You know, if I could see into the future, I would not be such a poor man.
Well, on the issue.
I want to ask Ramesh, though, if I may, please.
Sure.
The 16th, what's your understanding of the 16th, Ramesh?
The 16th?
Because you mentioned the 16th.
June the 16th.
All right.
June the 16th.
Before I go there, I'd just like to share a different perspective from Mr. Ram on the issue of CARICOM. Now, the issue of not accepting the declarations by the district officer was known widely and condemned by all. And the recount somewhat was aborted in discussions with the heads of government who visited Guyana, and the involvement of CARICOM was in. At this stage, CARICOM is a guest in the process. And I think the courteous thing to do to our guests is to allow them to express their opinion on what they may have been invited to do. Whether you want to argue it, whether they have a legal right to do so or not, I would just say it is a courteous thing to do. If for some reason they refuse to express an opinion, I think the order says that GCOM has the ultimate right and everything is within their realm. That's the only thing I'll say about the CARICOM's involvement at this stage.
Well, Ramesh, let me just say this in response to Mark, who sent the question. Here is what the order reads: that the CARICOM scrutinizing team shall submit a report to the commission which may include their observations, recommendations, and conclusions. So it does require a report, but GCOM, if I'm reading this right, Mr. Ram, GCOM is not obliged to include those.
That's the point I was trying to get. There's nothing that says in that agreement, and I think you were saying Granger inserted it perhaps with the best of intention that CARICOM should take note, and maybe that's a good thing. So if Mr. Lowenfield were to do something that was irrational, there's a second line that the commissioners ought to consider. The only point, Ramesh, we don't disagree, but there is nothing in paragraph 13, I think, clause 13 of the agreement that requires CARICOM to consider that report. Not as drafted. Whether it's an omission, I don't know.
Well, I believe that is debatable, so I won't form a direct conclusion on that. I think based on what you read there is no requirement to do before, but they've been here, they've been asked to scrutinize the process. In my view, it would be nice to hear from them before we conclude. It seems as though the incumbent has concerns about the quality of the process based on what they've been claiming. Allegations, of course, and things that they've highlighted from the recount. Concession of a loss in elections in Guyana don't normally happen as we see on television and all these fancy things that people do overseas and so forth. The last time we tried to get a concession out of the president, which was then Ramatar, we were told that, I don't want to tell you exactly, but that didn't come true because, as you know, they wanted to challenge things in petitions and so forth afterward. So I don't expect a concession, whilst that might be the right thing to do and the things to ease the tension and so forth. I believe this will be allowed to be played out and the CEO will present his report. Mr. Ram was asking about the June 16th. I believe that was a date to set that we don't want the process to exceed that date. It's the maximum date they want to go towards. But you know what? If the certification of the 10 regions are completed tomorrow and the CEO feels happy to submit his report by 7 o'clock tomorrow night for some strange reason, the declaration could be made tomorrow night if you wish. I mean, there's nothing preventing that from happening. June 16th is just an outlying date. Of course, the commission wants to discuss the observation report and the summaries coming out of the observation for the recount, which I think in fairness to them, they need to establish. And maybe even if it's only for learning and improvement for going forward, it will still be beneficial to them.
Right. And a quick question here for Mr. Ram. Mr. Ram, are the legal doors closed to the coalition at this point in time with regards to the declaration? And I'm talking before declaration could be made.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Are the doors closed to the coalition when it comes to doing anything before the declaration?
I think it would be bad faith. They have signed on to this order. And I believe that's the trap in which the APNU AFC finds itself. What does it do? It is saying tabulation is not validation. My understanding is that it's canvassing legal opinion, but what is it going to court for? It has agreed to this process. The process is incomplete, is in progress. Why try to interfere with the process? And there's another reason, practical reason. This is not like the no confidence motion when you could spend public monies like if it was going out of, like if they were going out of style. In this particular case, these are political parties. Governments do not fight elections. They do not compete in elections. It's the APNU AFC. Now, I'm not sure, and for Basil Williams, who was a candidate, and Roysdale Ford, two who I would say would be their more willing lawyers, they can't use state funds, though they probably are using state funds for all kinds of illegalities. They surely cannot or ought not to use state funds to bring a legal action. The court's doors are generally always open. There is judicial review if you think something some process by law is not taking place as it should, you can approach the court. But the court equally can say, look, please don't come and waste our time. I just want to get back to the 16 because I think it's people can be misled into this, not by any deliberate means. The chief elections officer has no later than the 13th to send his tabulation and his summary to GCOM. GCOM deliberates on it and gets back to the chief elections officer. There's no time for GCOM's deliberation. So if you take the 13th, there's no time for the deliberation. But GCOM goes back to the chief elections officer. There is no time for him to come back to GCOM. What you have is a date and a period. You have the 13th, Lowenfield must submit his report. After Lowenfield comes back to GCOM the second time, GCOM has 3 days to make the declaration. But the two things is not 13 and 3. It's two separate things altogether. Sorry, Ramesh, I thought I should clarify that.
Okay. And we're going to get back to that in a minute, but I want to bring this because both of you gentlemen mentioned Mr. Lowenfield. And I think there are a lot of questions surrounding Mr. Lowenfield, who stood by and allowed Mr. Mingo to do what he did. There is, whether direct or vicarious, there is some responsibility and reporting responsibility that lies with Mr. Lowenfield over his returning officers. However, Mr. Lowenfield stood by. Now, Mr. Lowenfield has been an integral part of this process. Ramesh, you have expressed positive vibes with regards to your foreseeing an outcome here. However, it is a considered opinion that the remaining steps are that the matrices will be produced, as Mr. Ram said, that is, they will go to the CEO, who will then tabulate the same and submit a report together with a summary of the observation. This goes to the commission. Within 3 days of the receipt of the report from the CEO, the commission will deliberate, as Mr. Ram says, and then request the same CEO to use the data compiled. Mr. Ram, is that a requirement that the CEO has to use the data compiled in this recount for the final report to the commission?
Let's get a couple things clear. You mentioned Lowenfield and Mingo. Lowenfield is responsible for Mingo, but what I think condemns Lowenfield in all the shenanigans is that he must have known that there were serious doubts about Mingo's numbers. Yet, Mr. Lowenfield used those numbers to make a report to the chair, to GCOM. So clearly he's part of that. And of course, as the chief elections officer, he is responsible. Now,
could he have refused? Could he have refused to not look at the numbers?
He could have said, look, there is an outcry out there about these numbers. He had enough reason. I think, Ramesh, some of you were probably there in Ashman's building when he came and saw some flawed numbers, and he demanded that they be corrected. But yet, at the critical moment, he allowed things to happen.
So just a quick follow-up there. Mr. Ram, could Mr. Lowenfield, is there anything that Mr. Lowenfield could possibly, well, let me rephrase this one here. Is Mr. Lowenfield mandated, obligated to look at the numbers that are being presented to him now based on the recount? And is there anything that could be used to not prepare a report?
And that question is directed at me.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Suppose he decides to go rogue and present whatever numbers he wants. The commissioners could ignore what he has said to them. If you look at the original order, They're not bound for that simple reason that he could have gone rogue. That's not a suggestion that he will, but that's to protect GCOM, because constitutionally, under Article 62 of the Constitution, it is GCOM that is responsible for the whole supervising of elections. And under the Representation of the People's Act, is the Chief Elections Officer, to whom the administrative functions of the conduct of elections are delegated to the Chief Elections Officer. And if, you take, it's common sense. If you see one of your subordinates doing something that is illegal, improper, or incorrect, do you allow it to be perpetrated and perpetuated, or do you step in? My view is you have a fiduciary duty to ensure, because these are senior public servants, public officers, they have a fiduciary duty to ensure that the public is not cheated and robbed.
So, Mr. Lowenfield, Mr. Ram, so Mr. Lowenfield is now, he's obliged, based on what I'm understanding, to prepare this report. The commission shall deliberate and request Lowenfield to use the data to prepare a final report. I think Mr. Alexander had said this to us the last time. So, Mr. Lowenfield, according to all of this, coming back to your point, Mr. Ram, does Mr. Lowenfield has any power or authority to insert his personal opinion or make a recommendation or make a judgment on any of these numbers, or he simply has to summarize the observations and the matrices and pass it over?
Well, he certainly has no power to vary the numbers. The numbers have been tabulated, they've been certified as correct, or they will be in another couple of days. There's absolutely no way he can vary those. And let's be clear, when they send back the report to Lowenfield, or the Chief Elections Officer, is to say, go and do a Section 96 of the Representation of the People Act report. So that is where you're moving towards the final stage of, here are the numbers for the APNU, ANOG, PPP, Chingan, etc. So at that stage, if he carries out his function, there should be no problem. Look, elections are...
Sorry, but at that stage, does he have any power to qualify or give an opinion to the numbers?
I think only a liberal interpretation would allow that, but then it is up to the commission to say, look, we have an obligation, Section 62, to deliver elections, and 162 talks about fair and transparent and so on. And we have noted what the Chief Elections Officer has said. We can probably consider that for purposes of implementation and tidying the system, because no system that involves so many people, 2,339 polling stations, about 15,000 public officers, you will get errors. No system is perfect. No elections anywhere are perfect. So, but in terms of the results, I cannot see how Lowenfield or GCOM can vary the numbers that have been tabulated. And quite frankly, everything after today is part of a circus. That should have been, if you were dealing with a recount, and this is what we ought to be dealing with, a recount. Why are we going into all of these frivolities? Is it just to appease people like Harman, who keep jumping from one excuse to another, and James Bond with whatever mischief he's suggesting at what social cost? So I want to make One other point, a lot of the points made in the observation reports have become subsumed in the decision made by GCOM yesterday. The will of the voter, as expressed on that ballot paper, is the supreme consideration. Anything else takes second place. And it go, if you want, bring an election petition. A country has to move forward. Tomorrow makes 99 days that we have not been with a parliament, a budget, a legitimate government. That can't be good for our society.
Ramesh, there cannot be without cause, or is there? Look, the APNU AFC hierarchy has spent considerable amount of airtime from yesterday to today, raising this whole notion about proving to the public, instead of the GCOM, proving to the public this thing about valid votes. And to you and Mr. Ram, I think Mr. Bond today started to share out this part, section 107 of the RPA, that speaks to the chief election officer shall, after calculating the total number of valid votes. So they're playing on this word validity. Ramesh, in your consideration, having sat through a number of these recount and going through everything at the Artisan Convention Center, this issue of validity of votes, or the validity of the voters, I think they're talking two different things here, right? It's not the validity of the votes, because that's been definitely asserted. They're questioning the validity of the voters. Does this question of the validity of voters have any space in this current state that we are in with regards to the declaration now?
From a simple layman perspective, I would say no, it shouldn't have any space. I'll go back to what we counted or observed during the recount. A vote allocated to a political party had to be deemed valid before it was counted and allocated to a political party. That valid vote had to be on a original ballot paper with all the security features that could have only been seen by a UV light, which the staffers would have verified. That ballot would have had to have been marked with an X in the right place. It would have had to have 6-digit numbers at the back of it to make it a valid ballot. When that valid ballot was counted, it was included in the SOR as valid vote. That was then further certified as a valid SOR or a valid vote counted and summarized in the SOR. The certificates that are being produced by the regions, for each region, and the subsequent matrix, or the matrix produced, is all referring to a certification of valid votes cast, which that section, I believe, referred to. So by tomorrow, by tomorrow afternoon, the CEO will have in his possession, whenever it's submitted to him, he will have 10 certificates of votes cast.
So, Mr. Ram, they are repackaging 107 that requires valid votes to a notion of valid voters then. Your mic is muted, Mr. Ram. Yes.
I'm not seeing that in 107, but this might be an error. My 107 says remuneration of election agent.
170, I believe. It is 170.
170. Okay, maybe they use another version.
But listen, in terms of the votes, that point has already been conclusively dealt with. Please don't take James Bond seriously. We talk about the voters as an issue is when you turn up and you show your ID card and you virtually aver that I am Christopher Ram or Ramesh Persaud or Yo Mario. That's the only time. After that is the ballot that counts. unless some fraud on the part of that voter. That's not an issue. And that, in terms of the fraud, that could only come out by way of an election petition. So I think, as I said earlier, all that is happening is that they're clutching at straws and they're hoping to push this as long as they can. Look, all those people are paid state funds. And I have sent letters to a number of them, and I've retained counsel to prosecute a number of them because the Constitution is very clear. The money, I've warned the Minister of Finance, Winston Jordan. The Constitution is very clear that you can only use this period for services of the government of Guyana. That is not what is happening. So this, people are having their last fling. Some persons are heavily invested in these elections, and we know many of them. We saw the other night, Stanley Ming came out and with his big statement. You've got Joseph Harmon, you've got a number of persons who have a vested interest in an illegal government being inserted on this country. That's what this thing is all about, is who controls resources and who are afraid of investigations into their conduct, into contracts, into family awards, and all of these things. Those are the dangers. This is why people are taking this thing as seriously as they are, and why I believe David Granger, who I think when it comes financially is an honest man, I don't think David Granger is in control to say to these people, look, we have to start putting the interests of the country first and let us regroup. We've lost these elections by, we've had 2 seats less. They had 33, they've now gone down to 31. That's not a shameful thing. They can regroup, and that's how democracy works. Yeah. That's how it worked for the PPP 2015. This is how it works for the APNU in 2020.
Correct. Leonard,
before I go there, just allow me to make a comment there quickly. You asked about valid vote, and Mr. Ram talked about people clutching at straws and so forth. I don't know if you can recall. I mean, there are 2 incidents that were reported in newspaper. One, a military person trying to vote twice and get caught in the process. And then there was some report of somebody attempting to vote twice at Mon Repos when they had a big ruckus out there, and it was being caught. I was in the tabulation room the other day, and a tendered ballot was identified as counted, and then the observation report said that there were suspicions that the person was trying to vote twice. So there are 3 instances that I know personally I've seen either in the newspaper or in the observation report of persons who tried to vote twice and were either identified and given a tendered ballot to vote in one instance that was recorded in the observation report. On the night of elections, I was in one of the room as an observer, and I'm saying this for you to understand why it is almost impossible for these kinds of things to take place. And the supervisor of one party, who was quite hostile, was trying to figure out who I was and why am I in the room. I was talking very harshly, almost threatening and all of that. And only the deputy returning or the district returning officer, the DRO, had to come to quiet him down to convince him that I'm a local observer, accredited enough to be in the room. The point I'm making is that anything that seems strange on the day of election to the supervisors and to the agents and so forth, there is queries and doubts about, at least in the zones that I was involved in at that point in time. Just to make that point, when people are questioning the validity of voters.
Thank you. Leonard?
Yes. I want to ask Mr. Ram, in his view, with the agreement to have a recount, has the door been closed for an elections petition?
The short answer is no. One is not to the exclusion of the other. Because you may very well find that GCOM will decide, as it decided yesterday, whatever the concerns are, we will make a declaration based on the validity of the ballots, and whatever happens thereafter or springing therefrom are matters for an election petition.
And then,
Mr. Ram, isn't it a kind of deja vu? Sorry, Leonard, I'll come back to you. Is there a kind of deja vu when Mr. Scotland Barton, when the speaker said, listen, these are the votes, you guys can take this to court and let the court decide the next step. Here it is again that we are having the votes, and their next step then would be election petition.
You know, I think that was the most unfortunate statement by Speaker Barton Scotland. It was most unfortunate. What happens in Parliament is a matter for the four walls of the Parliament. And unless something was unconstitutional, which it clearly was not, that ought not to have happened. And that, in my view, was the beginning of it. Mm-hmm. I think the CCJ did not help itself when I thought Saunders was careless in speaking about a lame duck cabinet. No, as the Chief Justice said, the cabinet fell on the night of December 21. At the moment the vote was taken, I thought the court did not do itself any favor. In this particular case, if it is based on an election petition as opposed to an administrative matter, and you know what I'm talking about, it stops at the High Court. Exclusive jurisdiction. And this is so that, you know, you have to have certainty about the government. Don't forget, in another couple of weeks, we are before the World Court.
Yes.
And we don't have a proper government. So it stops. It would not go to the Court of Appeal, and we all know how the Court of Appeal did itself a grave injustice by showing it is unable to understand what the majority of an odd number is. It will not reach the CCJ if it is an election petition. If it is an administrative matter, then it can go all the way. But as I said, the APNU AFC is in a quandary. They can't do that. They can't go for that unless there is a declaration. They can only go for administrative action before. They can't go before because they've agreed to this process. All they can hope is that this fourth stage that Granger talks about, at some one of those stages, is going to give them something that they can work, that is in their favor.
Right. Leonard?
Yes, and maybe a quick spin-off from that. Do you believe that the Madam Chair is going to allow that?
The chairperson has proved to be very unpredictable. And I would say even in matters of law, and I say that very respectfully, of someone who achieved quite exalted heights in our courts. But I don't think she's always acted fully in accordance with the law. But remember, she is not, and we must not encourage her to believe she's a GCOM operating as a judge of the Court of Appeal. Because, you know, sometimes she loves to talk, give me a submission, and I'm going to hand down a decision. It doesn't work that way. That's for the court. And she's not a serving judge. So I will be loath to predict how Madam Chair would rule on any particular matter. But I think I take some satisfaction from two things. She has said, and this comes back to her case, the Esther Pereira case, that he who asserts must prove. So if you're saying some dead man vote, produce the evidence. Already our Commissioner of Police has got himself into hot water for providing false, unsworn information. And she has said, or she certainly supported a position yesterday that the sanctity of the ballot trumps any procedural issue, even, and the cases are there to support that, even if there is gross negligence or even fraud on the part of the officers, of the election officers. And that was the case outside of Guyana. It wasn't written for Mingo.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Mr. Ram and Ramesh, consequences. Are there any consequences that Guyanese can contemplate for these defaulting employees of GCOM if it is so? Let's take Mr. Mingo and the act he did. Would there be any action taken if it were not a petition of a citizen of Guyana to the court to take such action? You're muted, Mr. Ram.
Perspective.
Your
Mic, Mr. Ram.
your mic is muted.
All right.
Yes.
Do you like me to answer the question?
Yes, please.
Look, fraud has been committed. It was committed on the first occasion by Mingo and Vola Lawrence. She is on record of having signed one of Mingo's declarations. I believe it's someone called Joseph who signed with Mingo on the second occasion. Those are some of the consequences. I want to draw a distinction, between officials and employees.
Mm.
My view is that the majority, and this is what I've heard, I don't know whether at Arthur Chung they brought the best. My information is that those persons work with integrity and professionalism and energy and commitment and passion and all of those things. I don't think the same can be said of Myers. I don't think the same can be said. Well, obviously, Mingo is in a class of his own. The same can't be said of Lowenfield. And you have people on the commission, whether on the government side or on the opposition side. They must not feel that they are immune from the laws. There is sufficient authority that they have a fiduciary duty to the country to deliver elections that are fair. Some of them behave, quite frankly, like if they're in some alleyway. But they are public officers carrying out high functions. You talk about consequences. The consequences of what Mingo has done, he has set this country back 90 something days. He has cost this country millions and millions of dollars. Now, surely Claudette Singh, as the police legal advisor in her job just before, she should have picked up the telephone and called in the police and said, look, we think we have a problem here. Maybe she still is going to do it. So let's give her the benefit of the doubt.
is there enough circumstances that could warrant the people calling for an inquiry into circumstances before, on elections day and after?
I believe that I see that as a secondary thing, which I was going to mention just now. I don't think with all of these complaints, with all of what has happened, with all of this money that we have spent, that we will not have a commission of inquiry into what has transpired. Because this country must never be made to go through this trauma ever, ever, ever again.
Indeed. Mr. Ram and Ramesh, your opinion of the political players in terms of the parties themselves. Simple question. Do you think AFC is going to survive these elections as a legitimate political party with an ability to attract votes? Ramesh, you want to go first?
I think the AFC accomplished some level of results starting in 2006 in going against the behemoths that had existed, right? And trying to rectify some of the wrongs in society that they believe might have been there. So they would have grown in popularity. I believe the AFC might have been a very formidable party had they not want executive power. We could have truly had a third force that holds either side to accountability. But they've went into the level of going into executive power and into coalescing with PNU. I believe they also lost a very good opportunity to distance themselves from what is currently taking place. So I believe the local government election when they ran by themselves is an indication of what happened to them based on numbers. And it is yet to be seen, but I surely think that the people who had a lot of confidence in them may have been the ones that have been turned away and gone to the other newer, smaller parties that are the newer parties that have been formed. But I surely believe that they squandered a very good opportunity to become a force of good in society.
Mr. Ram, I would want to ask your opinion on the same question of the AFC, but also if you can add what's your thoughts of the AFC and the WPA? Because it is a popular notion that the WPA now is absolutely and totally been put even beyond the graveyard.
And I think that comment about the WPA is right. The assassination of Walter Rodney, the anniversary, is coming up on 13, the very day that Lowenfield is supposed to be doing his report. That's purely coincidental. The WPA is a part of the rigging of elections. There is no mincing of words about that. The AFC, our good friend Camarade Ramjatan, he's a good friend of Kaicho News, especially Leonard, the very good friend of Leonard, Camarade Ramjatan. He had said the AFC would be dead meat. Well, his prediction has been spot on. They are dead meat. I think what has happened, the AFC's vote, probably quite a number of them may have gone to ANUG, and probably the LJP, the Change Guyana. What I think we may have, and I'm very careful about saying it, what we may have is some reconfiguration come the next election, because I believe these other parties the small parties have acquitted themselves during this recount, and they lent credibility to this recount. If it was just a PPP-PNC fight, I don't believe the PPP would have come out as in the moral high ground than they did. We are likely to see Lennox Schumann in the National Assembly as part of the that joiner. We have to keep watching. The PPP has a slim majority. They won these elections by just under 6,000 votes, I think, Ramesh, is it?
Just over 6,000.
6,300. That's not a big number. So, which is why I said I don't think the APNU, the AFC gone, the WPA is really dead. But
Mr. Ram, sorry to interject, but obviously there is a small percentage of this population that wants neither of the PPP nor the entire coalition of parties. And so it is strange, not strange, but it is telling that in 2015, APNU won by 4,500, I think was the net figure. And now the PPP has won by just about 2,000 more. But what would have gone, as you pointed out, Mr. Ram, to an AFC then now has gone probably split up in many pieces to the various third small parties. But obviously, there is a percentage, maybe a growing percentage of the population that wants to see, notwithstanding abysmal failure of AFC, wants to see other players in the system.
Well, I think one of the demographics have come into play. And I believe if you take 65% between African Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese, that gives you, so that's 65%, Amerindians roughly 15%. You have swing vote, persons not associated directly with one ethnic group or another. You have a 20%. Mm-hmm. And in any election makeup, 20% is crucial. If the PPP screws up again as it did in maybe 2011 to 2015, then that slim majority is going to disappear. I don't think the PPP is going to be given a large honeymoon. It's going to be tested. How it deals with that rag called the Daily Chronicle. I mean, that's a disgrace for a national newspaper. Mm-hmm. What kind of what composition of its parliament and its ministers, how it reaches out and across the aisle and across society, all of these things are going to be significant. Mm-hmm. Guyanese have enough reasons to be pessimistic, but we have lots of reasons to be optimistic as well.
Talking about optimism, Ramesh, there.
Go on.
Sorry, Yo. I want to ask you about our foreign policy, our relations with our partner. During these elections, it would have been very, lots of words, strong emotions being expressed about our diplomats, especially from the ABC and EU countries. Do you think it has changed the way that those countries look at us? Or I want to hear your opinion on that. You hear me, Mr. Ram?
Sorry, you know,
I wasn't clear with your question here, Len.
Okay, let me take. Has our relationships with the ABC and EU countries changed because of these elections?
Well, I think the relationship between the APNU and those countries may have been adversely affected. It's like how the relationship between the US and Guyana was adversely affected by Priya Manik Chan's outburst at the American ambassador's 4th of July observance. So, you know, in diplomacy, they talk not about permanent friends, but about permanent interests. Guyana is strategically important to the West. And unless they are forced to take action to show their disfavor with the election of an undemocratic and illegal government, I think we will move on. That will be part of the history. The APNU will have to decide how it will undo the damage it has done to its relationships, including not with the, I notice you call a lot of the countries north of the equator. But let's talk about the Trinidadian Prime Minister, Trinidadian Prime Minister, the Barbadian Prime Minister, Owen Arthur, the Jamaican former Prime Minister. It has created a lot of bad relationship with the Commonwealth. Don't forget, you know, Bernard, the chairman of GCOM has 2 Commonwealth advisors attached to her office. And if they were to screw up with these elections, it would be a slap in the face of so many people that it will hurt us. And it will hurt us in the international fora. It can hurt us in whatever unintended biases might exist inside the World Court. So we better be, we have to be careful. That would be my comment.
Thank
If I
you.
could just add something there, is just that the diplomatic relations, from my understanding, is country to country. And the only challenge that the diplomacy will have, or we will have as a country with diplomacy, is if we continue down a path of undemocratic practices or practices not consistent to the practices followed by other countries, all right? Political parties who do harm to countries end up getting punished by voters. They go back into their back rooms, they can reform themselves and could be liked by other countries coming forward. But a country-to-country relationship, as far as I know, is not being affected unless that country has leaders and governance that is inconsistent with the rules of other country. We as a country, we are members. I mean, when we join a club, for example, as an individual, we have to conform to the rules and regulations of those clubs. As a country, we are a member of OAS, we are a member of Commonwealth, we are a member of CARICOM, and the charters of those organizations require that we have democratic processes and certain principles of governance and so forth. So when those organizations are actually making comments about us as a country, it is to judge us to determine whether we are conforming to those standards, because they're only willing to do business with people who conform to those standards.
Correct.
They hate you as a party or hate you as a country.
But Ramesh, one could equally, but one could equally rebut a couple of things, because yes, it doesn't affect country to country,
Right.
but it does affect, to Leonard's point, it does affect our overall image and the willingness of persons to do business with us. And all of this presupposes that a declaration will be made, because that's my last question to you two gentlemen. Is there any possibility of Mr. Phillips, I think his 3-point option A, that APNU win, option B, that they declare PPP win, and option C is that they nullify these elections and call for fresh elections? So that would be my final question to you two gentlemen. Ramesh, you first. But before I leave the question with you, I just want to raise this. I find it passing strange that Transparency International and a number of organizations have all of a sudden in this country lost their voice. Ramesh, your take.
I believe a declaration will be made. We've been advancing through the process. I will repeat, we have been consistently getting statement of recount certified. We have been consistently getting the regional certificates certified. Based on what has been happening, I mean, it's not that it is one up. There are 2,339 statement of recounts that were agreed upon and certified. There are 9 regional declarations that have been certified today. Tomorrow, the other one will be certified. And I think all of that will lead to a report from the CEO that includes them. It will lead to a proclamation or declaration of the results by the chairman that truly reflects the will of the people. I don't think that there will be any variance from that.
Thank you. And just before I hand it over to you, Mr. Ram, I would just want to let you know that you have the final word in the program here, sir. So as you make your comments, it will be the last words. As we say to our viewers and listeners, it's been a wonderful time with you here in room 592. And Leonard and I will certainly see you tomorrow at 1:30. Mr. Ram, we still have 5 minutes to go. Your response to these questions, sir. One is with regards to your thinking about the voices of Transparency International and other similar organizations. But 2, sir, the deliberation specifically as relates to the next step for GCOM. Are they obliged to make a declaration? Is there a possibility that they could annul these elections and say they cannot give a declaration?
First of all, I'm not sure I could use 5 minutes.
Okay, that's all right.
Ramesh is there. I'm extremely disappointed in Transparency Institute. I'm a founder member. I wrote the Constitution, and I really, their silence is telling, and it's unbelievable. At a time like this, they are not the only people. Where are the churches? Where is the Guyana Human Rights Association? What more fundamental right is there than the right to choose a government of your own will? And for so much of society, I have expressed to one former chairman of GCOM, why don't you say something? Defend an organization of which you were a part that has been held up to ridicule. The I'll say it, voices like Clifford Reese and Komal Samaru, where are those voices? These are influential voices in the private sector. And they are going to be quiet at a time like this, when the future of this country is at stake. Is it cowardice? Is it hypocrisy? Whatever it is, it certainly is not acceptable. And really, I'm disappointed in the Catholic Church in the fight for free and fair elections pre-1992. The Catholic Church, Father Andrew Morrison, and we know Father Dark lost his life, a cameraman and a priest.
Correct.
Lost his life. And here we have, on the other side, you have your president of the Trade Union Congress taking part in what is clearly the rigging of elections. So I find this is a time of unfortunate reckoning. Some of the people you would have thought were friends, people of principle, they have somehow gone totally silent. And your second question? Is GCOM, I think they are constitutionally bound to make a declaration. This is not a test match, even though it lasted sometimes as long as a boring test match might seem to be. It doesn't open itself for a draw. The votes have been cast, the votes have been tabulated, they've been independently supervised by people like CARICOM, people like Ramesh Persaud, and so who have really worked. And moreover, it would be a self-indictment for Claudette Singh to say, look, having spent billions of dollars, because remember, each year, over $2 billion is spent on GCOM.
Yes.
Guyana has one of the most expensive election machinery in the world. For them to say, after all of this waste of money and the trauma they've put this country through, that we can't declare an election, then you have clearly failed in your primary function. And if they did, each of them should table their resignation there and then, because they would have failed in their sole major function.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ramesh Persaud, thank you, sir. My co-host, Leonard Gildari, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, viewers all across Guyana and everywhere else where you're joining us from, thank you. This has been tonight's discussion from Room 592. Until tomorrow, and of course tomorrow night, we continue this discussion on elections 2020. Have a good night, one and all. Bye-bye now.